The Galactic Academy's lecture hall buzzed with quiet excitement. The air shimmered with holographic displays, each showcasing past military conquests, legendary sieges, and some of the most impenetrable fortresses ever built in the known galaxy. Rows of alien students, each representing the finest strategic minds of their respective species, sat in tense anticipation. Some whispered amongst themselves, speculating on what kind of challenge awaited them. Others sat motionless, eyes locked on the stage where Professor Zilthar, one of the most revered tacticians in the universe, prepared to speak. Justin Ramos sat toward the back, his posture relaxed. Unlike most of his classmates, he had no bioluminescent markings, no shimmering scales, no natural armor or telepathic abilities. He was a human, one of only a handful in the entire academy. Over the past few months, he had grown accustomed to the way some students looked at him, with either mild curiosity or outright dismissal. Humans were known for their adaptability, but in a room filled with species bred for strategy, warfare, and advanced technological manipulation, he was an anomaly. Professor Ziltar, his elongated form adorned with ceremonial battle garments, raised a single clawed hand, signaling for silence. The murmurs died instantly. His voice, deep and commanding, resonated through the hall. "Today you will face the most important challenge of your academic careers," he declared. "A challenge that has determined the outcome of countless wars, the fate of empires, and the survival of entire civilizations." A pause. His gaze swept over the assembled students, lingering on those who were already mentally calculating their approach. "You will build a fortress, and you will defend it against one of your own." The room tensed. The concept of fortification was not new to any of them, but to construct something truly impenetrable? That was another matter entirely. Every civilization had its own methods of defense. Some relied on energy barriers strong enough to withstand planetary bombardment. Others favored elaborate misdirection tactics, utilizing gravity shifts, wormhole displacement, and psychic deterrence. The challenge would not be in building a stronghold. It would be in making one that no student, no matter how skilled, could breach. Professor Ziltar continued. "You will have full access to the Academy's experimental labs, its artificial intelligence systems, and its most advanced engineering tools. No limits will be placed on your creativity." However, he let the word hang in the air, drawing in every student's focus. "One of you will attempt to break through." That single revelation sent a ripple through the hall. Some students glanced at one another, already speculating who among them might be the designated attacker. Justin simply watched, his fingers tapping idly on the edge of his chair. Professor Ziltar gestured, and a holographic display flickered to life above him. It showed a vast, empty battlefield, a digital simulation of the terrain where their fortress would stand. "You have 3 days to complete your defenses. Afterward, a challenger will be selected to attempt a breach. If the fortress holds, those who built it will receive the highest honors the Academy can bestow. If it falls, then you have failed as strategists." The weight of his words settled heavily upon them. One of the students, a towering reptilian with emerald-hued scales, raised a clawed hand. "How will the challenger be selected?" The professor's yellow eyes gleamed. "Volunteers first. If no one steps forward, I will choose." The room buzzed with renewed whispers. No one wanted to be the one who failed. The fortress builders had the advantage of preparation, unlimited resources, and collaboration. The attacker? He would stand alone against all of it. Professor Ziltar seemed to relish the tension before speaking again. "Any more questions?" No one responded, then began. With that, the massive display shifted, revealing the full array of tools available. Students wasted no time springing into action, forming teams, already discussing advanced security measures. Groups of engineers rushed to secure the best construction materials, while tacticians debated over which traps would best deter an intruder. The sheer variety of alien technology being pooled together was staggering. Neural disruptors, phasing walls, self-repairing barriers. Justin stood up, stretching. He had no intention of joining the builders. He was more interested in the other side of the challenge. While the others raced to secure their spots in the fortress construction teams, he quietly approached the professor. "I'll do it," he said simply. Ziltar turned, his gaze assessing Justin for a long moment. The murmurs in the room halted as a few students noticed what was happening. "You volunteer as the attacker?" the professor asked. Justin nodded. "Yeah." A few quiet laughs echoed from the back of the hall, mostly from the more warlike students who had already dismissed the human as anything other than an observer. But Ziltar did not laugh. If anything, his expression became unreadable. "You understand what you are facing?" he asked. "What these students will build?" "I understand." A long silence. Then, slowly, Ziltar's mouth curled into what could have been the approximation of a smile. "Very well," he said. "The fortress will rise, and in 3 days, you will be the one to bring it down." The construction site buzzed with coordinated chaos. Alien students from across the galaxy worked relentlessly, their collective intelligence focused on a single goal: building the most impenetrable fortress ever conceived. Holographic blueprints flickered in mid-air, shifting and reforming as calculations were adjusted. Engineers barked orders in their native tongues, while programmers wove layers of complex security algorithms into the fortress's defense systems. The foundation came first. A reinforced structure composed of adaptive nanomaterial stretched upward at an alarming rate. Each wall bristled with automated turrets, their sensors calibrated to detect any movement larger than a dust particle. Some students worked on energy barriers, carefully tuning the frequency to ensure nothing organic could pass through without being instantly incinerated. Others perfected gravitational disruptors that would send any intruder spiraling into an endless loop of artificial gravity wells. Professor X Ziltar observed silently, his sharp eyes taking in the rapid progress. He moved between the teams, occasionally offering a nod of approval or a brief correction. Every student had something to prove, and under his scrutiny, no one dared to present a flawed idea. At the heart of the design stood Rixel, a member of the Zathari species known for their expertise in defensive architecture. His forearms moved rapidly, adjusting calculations and refining the fortress's neural firewall. His species had defended entire planets with their strategies, and he was determined to make this structure an unbreakable stronghold. "This fortress will hold," Rixel muttered, his voice carrying the confidence of a master engineer. Across from him, a blue-skinned Avlani student nodded in agreement. His people specialized in energy manipulation, and his focus lay in ensuring that the fortress's shields remained impenetrable, even under extreme force. He waved a hand, activating a projection of the fortress's defenses. "Our energy field will recycle external force," he said. "Any attack against the shield will be absorbed and redirected back toward the attacker. If Justin tries to break through, he'll be struck by his own force tenfold." Rixel grinned, his sharp teeth glinting under the artificial lights. "If he even makes it past the outer defenses." The outer defenses were nothing short of terrifying. A perimeter of sentient drones patrolled the area, each equipped with tracking systems that could detect the subtlest shifts in movement. Underground shockwave mines lay hidden beneath layers of reinforced alloy, programmed to detonate at the slightest unauthorized vibration. The fortress itself had only one entrance, a towering gateway flanked by plasma turrets that could vaporize anything larger than a grain of sand. Inside, the students implemented secondary measures. The corridors twisted and shifted in real time, ensuring that no intruder could map a direct path. Each room contained its own defensive mechanism: gravity shifts that sent the unprepared slamming into walls, holographic decoys designed to lead attackers in circles, and nerve-disrupting frequencies that could paralyze anything with a nervous system. By the second day, the fortress stood nearly complete. It loomed over the simulated battlefield, an imposing structure of dark alloy and pulsing energy. Students gathered to admire their work, some murmuring in hushed awe at the sheer complexity of what they had built. Even those who had initially been skeptical now stood in silent admiration. "This isn't just a fortress," one of them said. It's a weapon in itself. Professor Ziltar finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the ambient noise. It is impressive, he admitted. But an impenetrable fortress does not exist. Remember that. A few students exchanged uneasy glances. Rixel squared his shoulders. Then this will be the first. The professor said nothing, only watching as the final adjustments were made. The fortress's neural core hummed with life, its artificial intelligence integrating every defense into a seamless network. Every possible breach point had been accounted for. Every potential weakness had been reinforced. As night fell over the simulation, the students stood together, staring up at their creation. A monolith of security, designed to withstand anything the galaxy could throw at it. Justin Ramos would face an impossible challenge. Justin Ramos stood at the edge of the simulated battlefield, his eyes fixed on the towering fortress in the distance. The air vibrated with energy, a constant hum from the defensive systems layered over one another like an impenetrable web. The structure itself was massive, taller than anything he had expected, built with the finest materials the Galactic Academy had to offer. From where he stood, he could already see the perimeter patrols moving in synchronized patterns, drones gliding through the air in silent, deadly vigilance. He exhaled slowly. The students had done their job well. That much was obvious. Every known security measure had been implemented, every possible entry point sealed. There were no obvious weak spots, no gaps in coverage, no faults in design. If an ordinary attacker had attempted this challenge, he would have failed before even setting foot within range of the automated defenses. But Justin wasn't an ordinary attacker. He adjusted his gloves, flexing his fingers as he scanned the fortress with practiced patience. He had spent the last 3 days keeping his distance, listening in on conversations, watching the students work from afar. He hadn't needed access to their blueprints or schematics. His experience had taught him that people revealed more than they realized when they spoke. A single boast, an offhand remark, a subtle hesitation when discussing a certain section of the design, all of it pieced together into something useful. His plan wasn't to fight his way through the fortress. That would be suicide. His plan was to find the one flaw every structure had. The flaw that existed not because of technology, but because of those who built it. He stepped forward, slowly at first, measuring his movements as he advanced toward the first layer of security. The patrol drones hovered at precise intervals, scanning the ground below with a frequency that shifted every few seconds. The students had designed them to react to movement that didn't match their pre-programmed expectations. Any sudden rush, any attempt to sprint between them, would trigger an instant alarm. Instead of trying to outrun them, Justin matched their pace. He moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of the drones themselves, syncing his steps with their programmed rotations. The key wasn't speed, it was expectation. The drones expected threats to move unpredictably, to behave like attackers who knew they had limited time before detection. Justin, however, moved as if he belonged. He reached the outer perimeter undetected, his body pressing against the cold alloy of the outer wall. The next challenge lay directly above him. Automated turrets lined the fortress, capable of targeting even the smallest anomaly with inhuman precision. Each one adjusted its barrel at random intervals, scanning the area for heat signatures, motion, and unauthorized biological markers. Justin pulled a small cylindrical device from his belt. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a tool meant to hack into their systems. It was something far simpler. He activated it with a flick of his thumb, and within seconds, a faint distortion spread outward in a circular wave. It was a basic temperature modulator, designed to temporarily blend his heat signature with the surrounding environment. With the turrets unable to differentiate him from the walls, he moved quickly, climbing the side of the structure with practiced ease. The alloy was smooth, nearly impossible to grip, but Justin had trained for situations far more difficult than this. He reached a ledge just beneath one of the sensor arrays, pressing himself against the metal as he listened. Above him, the hum of machinery signaled the fortress's constant recalibrations. The students had designed it to adapt, to learn from every failed intrusion attempt. But Justin wasn't attempting a traditional breach. He wasn't forcing his way in. He was slipping through the cracks they didn't know they had left behind. He continued upward, careful to keep his movements fluid and controlled. He reached a maintenance panel just beneath one of the energy conduits, exactly where he had expected it to be. Every fortress, no matter how advanced, required maintenance. No matter how perfect the design, it still needed access points for repairs. This panel was small, almost unnoticeable, hidden in the shadow of a larger structural beam. He pried it open carefully, his fingers working quickly to override the basic security lock. The students had focused so much on external security that they had overlooked something simple. Maintenance hatches weren't meant to be heavily reinforced. They were meant for engineers, not intruders. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Justin slid inside, moving through the narrow crawl space as quietly as possible. The passage led directly into the fortress's inner framework, a network of conduits and ventilation systems that stretched throughout the structure. From here, he could hear the faint voices of the students monitoring the defenses. Perimeter secure, no anomalies detected, turrets report all systems functioning. They believed their fortress was holding strong. They had no idea he was already inside. Justin moved through the narrow crawl space with the quiet precision of someone who had spent years navigating confined spaces. The metal walls around him thrummed with the constant energy of the fortress's internal systems, their vibrations almost soothing in their predictability. He had mapped out his route in his head before entering, noting every potential hazard, every possible obstacle. Now, he had to move quickly. The longer he stayed inside, the higher the chance that the students monitoring the systems would notice an irregularity. He reached a junction where 3 passages intersected. One led toward the primary power core, another toward the central control hub, and the last toward the fortress's inner corridors. He had no intention of targeting the power supply. That would be too obvious. The students had undoubtedly reinforced it with emergency backups and fail-safe protocols. The control hub was another dead end. If the fortress was designed properly, direct access to its main security systems would be nearly impossible without triggering an immediate lockdown. That left only one path: the corridors. He exhaled slowly, steadying his heartbeat before reaching forward and releasing the hatch above him. It slid open without resistance. He pulled himself up and stepped into the dimly lit passageway, immediately pressing himself against the wall. The air smelled sterile, with a faint metallic tang, a sign of the fortress's advanced filtration systems. The corridor stretched in both directions, its walls lined with shifting panels. He recognized them instantly. The students had installed adaptive maze mechanisms, ensuring that any unauthorized intruder would be led in endless loops, forced into dead ends or redirected into security traps. The walls responded to movement, subtly altering their layout in real time. It was an impressive system, but it had a flaw. Justin moved forward, keeping his steps slow and deliberate. The walls shifted slightly as he passed, recalibrating their pathways in response to his presence. He tilted his head, listening. The soft hum of servos and processors filled the air, their rhythms distinct. The fortress was adjusting its corridors based on his perceived trajectory. That meant it was predicting his movements based on logical pathways, standard algorithms designed to confuse and delay. He smirked. That was a mistake. Rather than moving forward or attempting to navigate the maze, he turned and retraced his steps exactly as he had come. The walls hesitated for a fraction of a second, caught between adjusting to his reversal and maintaining their previous configuration. In that brief moment of uncertainty, Justin slipped sideways into a newly formed passage before the system could react. The maze had tried to guide him in one direction. Instead, he had used its own mechanics against it, stepping through an opening that wasn't meant to exist. He continued forward, keeping his movements unpredictable, Occasionally he doubled back, took sudden turns, or paused entirely. The fortress's defenses couldn't adapt fast enough. It had been designed to counter deliberate intrusion, not someone who ignored the logical flow of movement entirely. Within minutes he reached the core of the fortress, the inner sanctum where the students had stationed their final defenses. The room ahead was massive, a high-ceilinged command chamber filled with holographic displays. Several students stood at different control stations, their eyes fixed on the security feeds. They were monitoring the outer defenses, scanning for intruders where they expected one to be. None of them had even considered the possibility that he was already inside. At the far end of the room, a reinforced doorway led to the fortress's central vault, the final objective of the challenge. If he reached that room, the test would be over. Justin didn't hesitate. He moved forward, his steps silent as he approached the command stations. The students were too focused on their displays to notice him. He passed within arm's reach of one, his presence completely unnoticed. Then, finally, he stood before the vault. It was enormous, built from the same reinforced nanomaterial as the outer walls. Its surface pulsed with security fields, synchronized in complex patterns designed to prevent unauthorized access. Dozens of layers of encryption locked it in place, each one seemingly impenetrable. Justin pressed his hand against the surface, his fingers tracing the edge of a small, almost invisible panel near the lower left corner. He crouched, feeling along its surface until he found what he was looking for. A maintenance override switch, hidden in plain sight. It was a simple truth that applied to every fortress, no matter how advanced. Security measures were built for external threats, but maintenance crews, engineers, and technicians still needed access. There had to be a way in that didn't require bypassing the entire system. He pressed the switch. With a quiet hiss, the vault door slid open. The security fields deactivated instantly, the locks disengaging as the system assumed that an authorized technician was performing routine maintenance. The entire process had taken less than 10 seconds. Behind him, the students at the command stations finally noticed. One of them turned, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Impossible!" the alarm blared. Justin stepped inside the vault. The test was over. The moment Justin stepped inside the vault, the alarm system's blaring sirens shook the walls. The fortress, once a monument to invulnerability, was now screaming in protest, its defenses shattered not by brute force but by something far simpler: understanding. Behind him, chaos erupted. The students at the command station scrambled, their hands flying across holographic interfaces in a desperate attempt to reassert control. Security protocols that had never been meant to activate now flickered erratically, their logic failing to process the reality before them. The fortress had been breached. Justin exhaled slowly. The vault was empty. No treasure, no technology, only a simple indicator flashing green on the far wall, signaling completion. He had won. Before he could turn, the door slammed shut behind him. The security systems, though broken, were still trying to function, locking him inside as a last resort. He let out a quiet chuckle, a final act of defiance from a fortress that refused to admit defeat. The intercom crackled to life, and a familiar voice filled the space. "Justin, Professor Tar said," his tone unreadable. "Step back, we're releasing the locks." A moment later, the heavy door groaned open and Justin stepped back into the command room. All eyes were on him. Students who had spent days constructing an impenetrable stronghold, now staring at the man who had undone it in mere seconds. Rixel stood near the center of the room, his forearms rigid at his sides, his jaw clenched. His sharp yellow eyes burned with something between fury and disbelief. "How?" His voice was tight, barely contained. "How did you do it?" Justin met his gaze, unfazed. "I walked in." The silence was absolute. Then one of the students near the security console let out a frustrated growl. "That's not possible. You didn't disable anything. You didn't break through our defenses. You—" his voice faltered. "You didn't even set off half the alarms." Justin shrugged. I didn't need to. Professor X Giltar stepped forward, his imposing figure drawing the attention of the entire room. His yellow eyes studied Justin carefully before he spoke again. Explain. Justin exhaled, stretching his shoulders. You all built the perfect fortress. You covered every angle, reinforced every structure, anticipated every possible form of attack. He gestured to the surrounding walls. But that's the problem. You were expecting an attack. The students remained silent, their expressions shifting from disbelief to reluctant understanding. Justin continued. You relied on the idea that anyone trying to get inside would have to fight their way through your defenses. So you prepared for brute force, for hacking attempts, for stealth infiltration using advanced technology. He tapped the side of his head. You built a fortress to stop a soldier, but I wasn't a soldier. I was a janitor. A murmur rippled through the group. The maintenance hatch, Professor Exiltar said, his voice quiet but firm. The unguarded access point, Justin nodded. Every structure, no matter how advanced, still needs to be serviced. Security doors need repairs, power grids need checks. You focused on keeping enemies out, but you never considered how your own people would get in. Rixel's fists clenched. His voice was low, bitter. That's a flaw. Justin shook his head. No, it's not. It's reality. No system can be perfect because it still has to function. If you had sealed every access point completely, you would have trapped yourselves inside your own fortress. A structure that can't be maintained is just a tomb waiting to collapse. The room was deathly still. Then Professor Exiltar did something no one expected. He smiled. The sight of it sent a visible shudder through some of the students. The professor was not known for displays of approval. Well done, he said simply. The weight of his words settled over the room. Some students still looked frustrated, but none could deny the truth of what had happened. This lesson was never about designing an invincible fortress, Zilthar continued, his gaze sweeping over the group. It was about understanding the fundamental flaw in all defenses. Strength invites resistance. The harder you try to keep something out, the more someone will try to find a way in. The best strategy is not to build something unbreakable. It is to understand how it will be broken. He turned to Justin. And you understood that better than anyone. Justin gave a small nod. It's not about outsmarting the system. It's about thinking like the people who built it. For a long moment, the room remained still. Then, one by one, the students began to shift, some lowering their heads in reluctant acknowledgement, others murmuring among themselves, analyzing their own mistakes. Rixel still looked tense, his pride wounded, but he finally exhaled and gave a slow nod. I'll remember this, Justin smirked. Good. Next time, maybe you'll actually stop me. A few quiet laughs rippled through the group, breaking the last of the tension. Professor Exiltar clasped his hands behind his back. As the students filed out, some casting lingering glances at Justin, the professor turned to him one last time. You have a talent, Justin. Do not waste it. Justin shrugged. I try not to. He turned and walked away, leaving behind a fortress that had once seemed invincible, and a lesson that no one in that room would ever forget.